My name is Lucas Harrison, and on July 18th, 2017, I died. I never imagined I would be sharing this story, but I have no choice. What I saw, what Jesus showed me, was so terrifying, so undeniable, that keeping it to myself would be the greatest mistake of my life. Before that day, I had no strong opinions about faith. I wasn't an atheist, but I wasn't exactly a believer either. Religion, to me, was something people used for comfort, a way to explain the unknown. My mother was religious. She prayed for me constantly, always saying, "Lucas, one day you'll understand." I would smile, nod, and go on with my life, never taking it seriously. That summer, life was good. I had just gotten a promotion at my job as a construction foreman, making more money than ever before. My friends and I spent our nights out, drinking, laughing, living in the moment. I had plans. I wanted to buy a house, maybe start a business. Faith, eternity, none of that mattered to me. I was focused on the now. That afternoon, I was driving home after work, exhausted but content. The heat was unbearable, so I rolled down my window, letting the hot air hit my face as I turned up the radio. I wasn't paying much attention to the road, just enough to get home. I didn't see the truck until it was too late. One moment, everything was normal. The next, a blinding set of headlights, the deafening sound of metal twisting, my body being thrown forward as everything around me shattered. Then, darkness. I didn't wake up in a hospital. I didn't feel pain. I didn't even realize at first that I had died. At first, there was nothing, just a deep, endless void stretching in every direction. I wasn't scared. Not yet. I was just confused. I tried to move, but I had no body, no weight, no sense of direction. Then the silence was broken by whispers. At first, they were distant, barely audible, but as seconds passed, if time even existed there, they grew louder. Multiple voices, overlapping, murmuring in a language I didn't understand. The more I listened, the more I realized that these voices weren't human. There was something else, something watching, something waiting. Then, out of the darkness, a voice thundered, so powerful that it shook everything around me. "Stop!" Instantly, the whispers ceased. The darkness recoiled, and suddenly, a piercing light erupted through the void. It wasn't just light. It was alive. It moved, it breathed, and it carried a power I cannot describe. Out of that light stepped a figure. The moment I saw him, I knew. Jesus. I had never given much thought to what Jesus might look like, but in that moment, I understood why people fell to their knees in his presence. His eyes held eternity itself. Love, sorrow, justice, and mercy all at once. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, and in that gaze, my soul trembled. Then he asked me a question. "Lucas, do you know why you are here?" I wanted to answer, but I couldn't find the words. Then, without warning, it began. My entire life flashed before my eyes, not as memories, but as if I were reliving every moment. I felt every choice I had made, every time I had turned away from the truth, every opportunity to know him that I had ignored. But it wasn't just my actions. I felt the consequences of those actions, the hurt I had caused, the people I had led astray, the chances I had to choose God, and how I had dismissed them without a second thought. Tears streamed down my face. I was guilty, but Jesus didn't show me this to condemn me. He was showing me the truth, the reality I had refused to see. Then, everything shifted. The light around us dimmed, and suddenly, I wasn't standing before Jesus anymore. I was watching the world from above, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I saw a world in chaos. Fires burned across cities. The sky was dark. People were running, screaming. But there was something worse, something beneath the surface. I could feel the darkness, the deception that had taken hold of humanity. I saw people willingly walking into what looked like a system of peace, a new order that promised safety and unity. But behind it, there was something else. I saw figures, leaders, influencers, people in power, who spoke of progress. Yet their eyes were hollow, void of light. They were controlled. Then I saw people being marked. At first, it seemed harmless, a simple scan, an insignia on their hands and foreheads. But the moment they accepted it, I saw something leave them. Their souls dimmed. Their free will vanished. They belonged to something else now. They weren't enslaved in chains, but they were no longer themselves. Jesus stood beside me. His voice was steady, filled with both sorrow and urgency. This is what is coming. A choice is coming, and many will choose wrong. I watched in horror as churches that had once been filled with believers were now empty. But it wasn't just because people had stopped believing. Many still claimed to follow God, but their faith had been twisted. They believed in a version of Christianity that was comfortable, compromised, and powerless. I saw preachers who once spoke the truth, now leading people into deception. I saw Christians who once followed Jesus, mocking those who still held onto the word. Tears fell from my eyes. Jesus, why are you showing me this? I asked, what can I do? His gaze met mine, filled with both love and sorrow. Because the time is short, and I am still calling to them, I turned back to the vision. I saw believers, true believers, being persecuted. They were hunted, rejected, forced into hiding, not just by the world, but by those who had once called themselves brothers and sisters in Christ. The world had turned against them, and yet they remained firm. They were not afraid. They stood in the fire, and they did not waver. Jesus stepped forward, and the vision faded. I was back in the light, standing before him. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought of my mother, of the prayers she had whispered for me night after night, of the moments I had ignored her warnings. I thought of my friends, my coworkers, all the people I knew who were walking straight into the darkness, unaware of what was coming. Jesus, please, I begged. Let me go back. Let me warn them. He stepped closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. You will return, he said, but many will not listen. Many will mock you, reject you, but some will hear. And for them, you must speak. Before I could say another word, a force pulled me backward. The light around me blurred. And suddenly, I gasped, my lungs burning, my body convulsing as I jolted awake in a hospital bed. Machines beeped wildly. Doctors shouted, and my mother was sobbing beside me, clutching my hand. I had been dead for 6 minutes, but I had been given a second chance. I lay in a hospital bed, my body weak, my mind racing. I had died. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen what was coming. Now I was back. But why? The doctors were baffled. I had been clinically dead for 6 minutes. By all logic, I should have suffered severe brain damage. Yet I was fully alert, aware, and speaking clearly. They called it a medical miracle, but I knew better. It wasn't medicine that had brought me back. It was him. My mother never let go of my hand. She wept, whispering prayers of thanks over and over again. My father, however, stood in the corner, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was a practical man, a skeptic. I could tell he wanted to believe that my survival was miraculous, but he also wanted an explanation, a logical one. That first night after waking up, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The faces of those people who had been marked, their eyes hollow, their souls no longer their own. The churches, once filled with passion, now empty and abandoned. The persecution, the real kind. Not just people being mocked for their faith, but hunted, arrested, even killed for refusing to conform. And then, most haunting of all, I saw the pit. The abyss where lost souls cried out, reaching for salvation that would never come. I had to tell someone. The next morning, with my mother and father sitting beside me, I gathered the courage to speak. I told them everything. How I had left my body. How I had fallen into the darkness. How I had seen Jesus. How he had shown me the future. I watched my mother's face go pale, her lips trembling, but she never interrupted. My father, however, let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. This was just a dream, Lucas, he said firmly. You were dead. Your brain was shutting down. People see things in situations like that. I turned to him, my heart pounding. Dad, I know what I saw. This wasn't a dream. I saw Jesus. I saw what's coming. People think they have time, but they don't. The door is closing. My mother wiped at her eyes. What do you mean the door is closing? I swallowed hard. Jesus told me a choice is coming. Something will happen that will force people to pick a side. They'll either stand with him or they'll follow the world. And most, I exhaled, the weight of what I was about to say pressing on my chest. Most will choose wrong. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "Lucas, do you hear yourself? You sound crazy." I stared at him, pleading with my eyes. "Dad, I saw hell. I saw people I know in that place. Friends, classmates, people who thought they were good, who thought they had more time. But they didn't. It was too late for them." Silence filled the room. My mother reached for my hand again. "Lucas," she whispered, "what does God want you to do?" That question echoed in my mind over the next few days. What did God want me to do? It wasn't just about telling my parents. I knew that. I had to warn everyone. But how? Where'd I even start? The first time I spoke publicly about my experience was at my church. My mother convinced the pastor to let me share my testimony. As I stood at the front of the congregation, looking out at the faces of people who had known me since childhood, doubt crept in. Would they believe me? Would they think I had lost my mind? I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them about the accident, about the darkness, about Jesus. I told them about the visions of the last days, about the deception that was already creeping into the world, about the choice that was coming. The room was silent. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others looked skeptical, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. When I finished, the pastor stood up, cleared his throat, and said, "If this is true, then we have no time to waste." That was the moment I realized that not everyone would believe me, but some would. Some would listen. And for those people, I had to keep speaking. Over the next few months, I dedicated myself to spreading the message Jesus had given me. I spoke at youth groups, Bible studies, and anywhere that would let me share what I had seen. Some people believed, others mocked. I lost friends, people who thought I had lost my mind. Some even accused me of making the whole thing up for attention. One night, I was invited to speak at a university group. The students were polite, but I could see the doubt in their faces as I told my story. Afterward, a young man approached me, his expression unreadable. "I want to believe you," he said. "But if what you're saying is true, then almost everything I've ever believed is a lie." That's hard to accept. I nodded. I know. It was hard for me too. But ask yourself, what if it's not a lie? What if Jesus really is coming soon? What if the choice you make today decides your eternity? He swallowed, looking away. I don't know. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small Bible, placing it in his hands. "Start here," I said, "and ask God to show you the truth." I never saw that young man again, but I pray for him to this day. I pray that he made the right choice. As time went on, I realized the battle wasn't just about warning people. It was about preparing them. Jesus had shown me that a time of testing was coming, and those who weren't ready would fall. Faith couldn't just be a Sunday morning ritual. It had to be real, unshakable. I had seen believers in my vision who thought they were strong in their faith. Yet when the deception came, when the persecution started, they were the first to turn away. They weren't prepared. They had built their faith on comfort, not conviction. That was why Jesus had sent me back, not just to warn people, but to wake them up, to make them see that faith is a fight, and that if they weren't ready to stand, they would fall. Not everyone wanted to hear my story. At first, I thought people would listen. I thought that if I just told them what I had seen, what Jesus had shown me, they would understand the urgency, that they would wake up. But I was wrong. Many people dismissed me outright. Some laughed, shaking their heads, telling me I had just imagined it. Others were polite but distant, avoiding the topic whenever I tried to bring it up. And then there were those who got angry. I never expected that. One of my closest friends, Mark, was one of them. We had grown up together, played football in high school, and worked on job sites side by side. When I told him about my experience, I expected him to at least listen. Instead, his face twisted with frustration. "Come on, Lucas," he scoffed. "You really expect me to believe you died, met Jesus, and now you're here to warn us all? Do you even hear yourself?" "Mark," I said, my heart pounding, "I don't need you to believe me. I just need you to ask God yourself. Pray. Seek the truth. Because if I'm right, if you're right." He cut me off, shaking his head. "Then what? The world is ending, and we're all doomed unless we listen to you? You're not a prophet, Lucas. You're just a guy who got in a bad accident." I felt the sting of his words, but I refused to back down. "I'm not asking you to listen to me," I said. I'm asking you to listen to him." He scoffed again, rolling his eyes. "I don't need saving, man." A heavy silence filled the space between us. I wanted to push, to plead, but I saw the wall he had put up, and I realized something painful. Not everyone would listen. Some people would never listen. Jesus had warned me. He had told me that many would reject the truth, that many would mock me. But standing there, looking at someone I had called my brother in this life, watching him walk away from me without another word, I understood the weight of what I had been called to do. Speaking the truth would cost me something. Friendships, respect, comfort. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Months passed, and I continued to share my testimony. Sometimes people listened. Sometimes they didn't. But I knew one thing for certain. Time was running out. The visions Jesus had shown me still burned in my mind. The deception was already creeping in. I could see it everywhere. Faith was being diluted. Churches were preaching comfort instead of conviction. People were more afraid of offending the world than they were of denying the truth. It was all happening just as he had shown me. One night, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy. I prayed, "Jesus, am I doing enough? Am I reaching the people I need to reach?" A peace settled over me. Then, in my spirit, I heard his voice. "Keep speaking. Keep warning. The door is closing." I sat up, chills running through my body. The door is closing. I had heard those words before. In my vision, I didn't know how much time was left, but I knew it wasn't much. I don't share this story to scare you. I don't share it to get attention. I share it because I was given a second chance. And I don't want you to wait until it's too late. Jesus is calling. The choice is coming. And the door is closing. If this message has reached you, don't ignore it. Share this story. Leave your name and city in the comments so we can pray for you. And if you haven't already, take the first step. Seek Jesus while there is still time. When I woke up in that hospital bed, I thought surviving the accident was the hardest thing I would face. I was wrong. Coming back to this world, after standing before Jesus, after seeing the future that awaits, was far more difficult. I wasn't the same person anymore. I couldn't be. Everything I had cared about before, the job, the money, the parties, the fleeting pleasures of life, felt meaningless compared to what I'd seen. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to warn. But how do you tell the world something they don't want to hear? At first, I tried to go back to my normal life. I thought maybe I could ease into it, take my time. I convinced myself that I didn't have to rush, that there would be plenty of time. But those words, asterisk the door is closing asterisk, would not leave my mind. I saw it everywhere. I saw it in the way people lived, oblivious to what was coming. I saw it in the news, in the division, in the way faith was being watered down, turned into something easy, comfortable, powerless. I had seen what was coming, and I knew that time was running out. I couldn't stay silent, so I spoke. At first, it was small. Conversations with friends, family. Some listened, some didn't. Then, I shared my story at church. Then, in larger groups. Then, in places I never expected to be invited. And the reactions were always the same. Some believed, some laughed, some got angry, and some listened with fear in their eyes because deep down, they had always felt something wasn't right. They knew the world was shifting. They had sensed it. And when they heard my story, they recognized the truth in it. But even then, I realized that not everyone would accept it. I remember one conversation in particular. A man approached me after I spoke at gathering. He was well-dressed, successful, the kind of person who had everything figured out. He shook my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I don't doubt that you saw something, Lucas, but I can't believe in a God that would let people suffer like that." I felt the weight of his words. I understood. I had asked the same questions when I stood before Jesus. But I looked at him and said, it's not God who is sending people into deception. It's their choice. He's calling them. He's showing them the truth. But most people don't want it. They want what's easy, what feels good. They don't want the real Jesus. They want a Jesus who fits their lifestyle, not the one who asks them to follow him. The man looked at me for a long time, then shook his head and walked away. That's when I truly understood. Not everyone would listen. Not everyone would choose him. And yet, I had to keep speaking, because someone would. Months passed, then years. I continued to tell my story, and the world continued to change, just as I had seen. I watched churches divide over teachings that had never been questioned before. I saw faith being turned into entertainment, more about making people feel good than about calling them to repentance. I saw the world shifting into something darker, more deceptive, something that felt eerily familiar to what I had witnessed in my vision. The choice was coming, and most people didn't even realize it. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below, I felt that same presence I had felt before. Jesus. I didn't see him, but I knew he was there. And in my spirit, I heard his voice again. Asterisk, keep speaking. Keep warning. The door is closing. Asterisk, chills ran down my spine. The same words. The same warning. But this time, I felt something else. Urgency. Time was shorter than before. I don't know how much time is left, but I know this. There is still time to choose. And this message is for you. You may think you have years ahead of you, that there will always be time to turn to God. But that's the greatest deception of all. Because one day, whether through death or through the fulfillment of what has been foretold, the door will close. And when that happens, there will be no second chances. I was given a second chance, not for my own sake, but so that I could warn you. Jesus is calling, but he won't wait forever. So I'll leave you with the question that was asked of me. When the time comes, when the choice is placed before you, which side will you stand on? Jesus is calling. Will you answer? If this message has spoken to you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe, and comment your name and city below. I'd love to give you a special shout out in the next video. Keep watching, because the next story could change everything for you.